654-321. David Shapiro is our man on a Monday. Dave, there was a very late announcement to come from Steinhoff on Friday. There are many people interested in the goings-ons at Steinhoff. It appears as though the company is making a slightly better offer to shareholders. It had come out with an agreement to begin with. We're going to be talking with Bernard Mostert, who's really on the sharp end of that offer. But when an announcement comes out late on a Friday afternoon, it's not usually good news.
Well, for Steinhoff, this seemed to be good news, but it's always, very late in the afternoon. The shares did respond. The share price went up about 11%, but saying that conditions have improved and therefore they were able to offer the claimants a lot more. I'm surprised that against what Bernard says and against what the high courts in the Cape decided, that the market has brushed this aside. And that's why we're in the middle. We're saying, okay, if the courts say one thing and the other courts say another thing, who's going to win this battle? Because I think shareholders are in the middle. I'm on the side of Bernard because in the sense that you can't ride roughshod over kind of the Companies Act or over claimants, in a broad type appeal. There's so many elements to this whole claim. And, that's why I'm so interested in hearing how Bernard sees this going forward now.
Well, that's a lovely segue into our guest. Bernard Mostert is he's owed a lot of money through the Tekkie Town purchase by Steinhoff, with what Bernard and his partner, Braam Van Huyssteen, say was with worthless paper. Bernard, what was the number? How much did they pay you for Tekkie Town?
Yeah, Alec, and David, thank you for your time. First of all, I think the first thing is that it's not that I'm owed a lot of money. I'm owed a business. So, that's what we gave away, and that's what we would like back.
But it's billions. We're talking about billions of rands.
The quantum of value that we delivered to within Steinhoff, and that was then structured into Pepco, on our side is about 1.85 billion rand. Total value of the business was 3.2 billion rand. We accepted an exchange of shares for the business, shares that we couldn't sell. We did that for a very specific reason. And, it's interesting to see this whole process unfold. And, it's also interesting to see it in the context of the sad events that have happened in our country in the last week. So it's, I'm skeptical on Steinhoff, but I'm optimistic on South Africa.
Well, glad to hear that. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to have a chat about that in a moment as well. But as far as Steinhoff is concerned, there are three groups of creditors, three groups to whom something has to be paid. You're in one of those groups. There's also a Christo Visa and Co. And then there is the financial owners. And I got all of this from Adams and Adams's Jacques Marais, who actually took me through the whole story. And David, at last I understand exactly what's going on here, excepting that on Friday, there was an adjustment to the offer, which up to this point, the shareholder group, or Hamilton as it's known, has been extremely resistant. Was there enough in the offer for the shareholder group to say, okay, we'll accept it, or more importantly, for you to do that? Bernard?
Alex, sorry, I thought the question was addressed to David just in terms of the Hamilton piece. But we are running a process. We believe that all the proceeds of the fraud and how that gets distributed will be better addressed under a form of curatorship via liquidation in South Africa, and hence the fact that that's what we apply for. So the increase of the offer is, slightly ironic because it's quoted as being enabled by better than expected performance during COVID. But the reality is that the offer was constructed before COVID was even a thing. So it's you can kind of smile at that coat of paint that's put on it. But for us, we believe that the best outcome here is actually to have a South African court address a South African crime and make sure that the proceeds of this fraud doesn't flow to various pockets where it can't be put to good use again in the hands of those people that were defrauded. Whether you're a pensioner, whether you're us as entrepreneurs, whether you're the Visa family with their extensive holdings in South Africa, all those people were the victims of this fraud. And we need to ask ourselves, who are now the beneficiaries of the fraud?
Just to dwell a little on the Visa family, they injected Pepkor, and it was a very strong business. And yet he's prepared to accept 30 cents in the rand for the business that he put in there, which seems strange. Why would that be?
I obviously can't speak on behalf of the Visa family, nor do I wish to. But I do think that Braam and ourselves have accepted that this is going to be a long fight, and we've got it in us. And you look at Christo and his career and what he's built up here and what he's lost. And at the age of 80, I think it must be it's a very difficult position to be in to see how you're going to play forward, because this is a process that will still take years.
So it's maybe a pragmatic approach from his side, because in many ways there's a parallel. He had a business. He was also fooled and given fraudulent paper.
Sure.
In your case, you were right at the end of the fraud. I mean, there can be no doubt. Maybe in his case, there might still have been some doubt about the extent of the fraud. In your case, clearly they were taking you for a ride. But there are those parallels. So I guess it's an obvious question, David Shapiro, on why Visa would accept and Mostert and Van Huyssteen wouldn't.
Yeah, it's. I think Bernard said exactly that. He's old. He's 80. I mean, he can live for another 15, 20 years. Have a lot of fight in you to go through the processes of appearing in court, and it's a long, drawn out process. I tend to be on Bernard's side and saying, this should be split up. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to sell a business, to sit around a boardroom table, sell your incredible business to people sitting around there and be hoodwinked into exchanging good paper for bad. And then at this process that we're going to see now, not be able to actually reverse that or not have the courts reverse that. I think in financial markets, we always take risks. Our risks are different as shareholders. It's one expects it, and you're happy to write off the investments. But I mean, for people who actually run businesses, who created something from nothing, I think it's a totally different approach. And Bernard's 100% right or entitled to get that back. I don't give a damn for people in our market, for shareholders. I was never a shareholder. We didn't do the work. We could have seen the signs. They were all there. No one took advantage of them. But I mean, for people who sold businesses, it's a different approach. So if you can find the technicality, and I was hoping, this is what we're praying for, or we're looking for, is that if the courts can find something to prevent this offer being made to claimants, and that's the right way to go, which I thought Bernard had done. I thought they were able to bring it to a halt. But obviously, there's still a lot of hoops to jump through.
Well, certainly somebody believes not, because if the share price went up 11% on Friday on a slightly higher offer to shareholders, then somebody believes that it's going to go through. Bernard, how would you dissuade them?
Yeah, Alec, I think, David's the expert here, so I'll defer to him. But I think that if you look at Steinhoff, volumes are very thin. And I would argue that that is not an indication of general market sentiment. I would also argue that, if you see those thin volumes, it doesn't speak to real institutional power behind driving up that share price. So, I think, quite frankly, whomever is left in dealing in Steinhoff now are merely speculative.
So as far as you're concerned, there's no way that you're backing down. You are not going to be accepting the higher offer that was put on the table on Friday.
Alec, to be perfectly honest, we haven't studied it, but I think I can give you that answer, is that we're not going to accept it. And we're not going to accept it at various levels. I think, it's again, a very philosophical point, but I think as South Africans, it would be completely the wrong thing for us to do, to accept this offer. Because if you look at what would happen to it, and Steinhoff says that in the SENS report, that they would still have to get Reserve Bank approval for the expatriation of these funds for the increased offer. You see the billions of rands being ripped out of South Africa and out of the South African economy, flowing offshore, ostensibly mostly to settle and secure so-called financial creditors. I mean, the hedge funds and the bulge hedge funds that you and I discussed the last time we spoke. And you ask yourself, is that something that we want to participate in? Our kid's going to look back one day and say, Dad, what did you do when this 200 billion rand left our shores?
David, it does appear to be a very deep disease that corporates have got, where they will settle to get it off the table and carry on with life. In other words, your first knock's your best knock, and you've heard those sayings many, many times. Perhaps it is time for the whole future of capitalism to start being less pragmatic and more idealistic about these issues. Otherwise, where does Adam Smith's morality undertone go to?
Alec, I'll take it a step further, maybe just moving away from what you're saying. Go have a look at annual general meetings. Go look at meetings. Nobody turns up there and questions the management. Why? Because we're all in passive investments. We're in ETFs. We're in hedge funds. We're not really involved on a day-to-day basis. We're not, as Mr. Buffett would say, we're not partners. These chaps are not partners. They're just there for a quick punt. Bernard's a partner. He was a partner, and I think that's why his approach is so different. And I've got no vote for the hedge funds, for all those other speculative vehicles that traded in the stock. And that's why I feel Bernard's got a very, very strong case to get his business back, as other people as well. And I would, there's so many other businesses that were taken down the same line, in some of the frauds that we've seen recently. And it's just sad that you could sit around a table with a person you trust, sign on the basis of that, knowing they know it's a fraud. It's not that the fraud, this was a fraud from the time that they started the company. That's a tragedy.
You got to think similarly about EOH, for instance.
Exactly.
They bought a lot of smaller businesses.
That's who I was alluding
to. With inflated paper. But Bernard, just getting back to what you mentioned at the outset of this conversation, when you referred to the developments in South Africa of the past week, how does this affect the way you're viewing this?
I think the single biggest thing that we've seen in the last week is also something that we've preached, for lack of a better word, for some time now. If there's no accountability and people believe that they can get away with things, then you've got this groundswell where people think it is acceptable. So, truth be told, if you look at, and obviously our parcel of businesses were affected by the looting in South Africa. If it was stopped on the Friday evening when it first stopped, I think that it would have been a fairly minor event. But by the Saturday and the Sunday, the tide was so big that you just couldn't stop it. And as a result, I think quite a lot of it has to do with the fact that people were told that you will not get into trouble, you will not get prosecuted, etc. And I can only, again, smile, and sadly so, tragically so, at an interview that was on ENCA a week ago with a spokesperson from the NPA, where they said, what if you were somebody that were innocent in a store that just walked into that mall and now you get arrested? And he said, well, if you're not doing something about that, you were complicit and therefore you will be prosecuted. So that's to me, that's the right message. That's the message that we should send. And it's no different here. So if we participate in a settlement now, and we don't get a chance to reinvest the money that we have made in South Africa, that we've invested in South Africa, to do that again, I do think it would be injustice. It would be an injustice, particularly to our families, but much greater so to South Africa.
Bernard, thank you. That was great. We'll have our little chat with David now. But fantastic, man. Thank you for that, and I think it'll speak to a lot of people. Cheapers.
My kids tell me that 3,000 views on YouTube is okay, but it's nowhere close to the millions that 16-year-olds get on TikTok. So I shouldn't get a big deal.
We can do the TikTok version.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
guys, it's a good chat. I'm going to step off then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bernard.
Cheers,
Brilliant, man. Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Bye. David Shapiro, on a Monday, we always have an opportunity to talk about events of the past week. How do we even start talking about the events since we last spoke?
It's very difficult. I think it was an exhausting week. When I say exhausting, I match it to watching 9/11, where those events unfolded in front of your eyes. Look, there were a lot more people, and it was a lot more tragic in terms of loss of lives in America. But you were compelled, and that viewing just took it out of you. You could not believe what you were seeing. And I think when we saw mall after mall being mauled for South Africans, it was a week of shame. There was no moral compass. There was no shame. There was no sorrow in what the people were doing. And I can't believe that even poor people don't have some kind of sense of what's right and wrong. Everybody there knew they were doing wrong. And that disturbed me. That got to me. If it's bread, if it's milk, if it's the basics of life, I can understand people rioting. But the way that this was done, and the trucks coming and fridges going, the visions for the rest of the world just made us the laughing stock. And I think it's taken us down so far. It's going to be very hard for us to reverse this, to get our credibility back and to get people's belief up again. Anecdotally, I think it hurt a lot of people here as well. I haven't heard negative talk like this for a long time. People just feel flattened. And I think they were also upset by, as Bernard said there earlier, by the lack of response by government. If they would have acted early, we could have understood. But it was just allowed to go on with billions being lost. And it's going to take a long time to recover this. And the queues that we're seeing now, just crazy. People queuing 10 hours just simply because there's no access points to get food. There are very, very few things. So the markets have held up well, but markets are something else. That's difficult to explain because our markets are not reflective of what's happening in Main Street. They're a different animal.
Do they understand, those people sitting in London and New York, and there's so much going on in the world right now? Do they understand the tear in the fabric of the South African society? And I say that with all humility, because coming from KwaZulu-Natal, having deep contacts there, lots of friends, family, who have spent literally the last week thinking, are they going to be attacked? So they were manning barriers. They were people of 70, even older than that, with heavy weapons, just waiting for the looters to decide to go into the suburbs. Now, once you've been through that experience, it's unlikely that you'll ever see the world in the same way again.
No, because you always expect that it's going to happen again. And protecting your life is one thing. And it's very easy to be optimistic about something, but you've got to be optimistic for a reason. And I think this has done the opposite. People are very cautious. And I was talking to a lady who works in my little team. She's in Pietermaritzburg. And believe me, they are they're living in fear. Yes, they're talking about the community that's come to their assistance, because if someone's able to get bread, it's distributed. And that kind of sense does prevail, but their fear for their lives continues, and their fear for that this can happen again. And there's always talk about another hot point. Don't go there. We believe they're going to storm Escort or so on. So this has not abated. This just continues. And from a foreign, from the local point of view, from a stock market point of view, our market's split into different kind of pockets. And it's quite remarkable that the local pocket has held up, I say, reasonably well. It's fallen. Property shares have fallen. Bank shares have fallen. Retailers, though, are not as badly hit as I thought. The foreign side is different. Richemont has got nothing to do with South Africa or BHP and so on. And those shares will reflect what's happening on other markets. But locally, I don't think there's been the sell-off that we thought would happen. I don't know why, because to me, I think there's going to be a lot of, the cost is going to be enormous. I think when we get down, with our calculators and we start actually calculating the amount, I think it's going to be big. It's massive.
There might be a little misunderstanding as well. For decades, South Africans have been contributing to Sasria, the riot risk. However, the latest annual report of Sasria tells us they've got only 6 billion rand in assets. Now, you got to wonder where the other tens of billions have gone, because over this period of time, there's been a heck of a lot more than 6 billion that should have been invested in that special riot fund. I mean, that predates, long predates the 80s even. So, David, that might be giving people a false sense of security. Well, it doesn't matter. We've got this riot fund. We're going to get our money back. Jason McCormick, and I would urge you to listen to that interview. They own shopping centers. He said the guys who came there, the MPs who were in the vanguard, took out the firefighting equipment. That was their first target. Of course, they were shooting at the security guys as well, but they took out the firefighting equipment so that when the looters could get there, they could burn down the malls. And these are malls, Ladysmith, Newcastle, where the community, if they don't have those malls, they got nowhere to go shopping. It was a very planned. I'm surprised that we aren't these stories, the real on-the-ground stories, are not being appreciated yet. I think Cyril Ramaphosa gets it, but it seems as though many pundits are not. But getting back to Sasria, what Jason said as well was that the numbers that are being thrown around are massively understated. From his own business, I think they lost 6, maybe 7 shopping centers. They're probably going to be taking up a big chunk of that 6 billion rand that's left in Sasria. What happens to the rest? Where do business owners get reimbursed if there isn't the fund that is available for them?
Look, Mr. Price will be fine. Those groups will be fine, because it's in the shopping center that they will rebuild their outlets. So if the shopping center is not there, they'll go somewhere else. So if you look at the retail groups, they're in a better position, because all they have to do is restock there. And I mean, it's quite a complicated issue with landlords and all the big groups. It's those property owners, it's the smaller businesses that are going to suffer the most, not the big groups that are listed on the JSE. And I think that's the cost that we haven't accounted for. I looked at their balance sheet, Sasria, as well, a couple of days ago as well. I got to a point, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I saw about maybe 8 or 9 billion or something like that.
Yeah, gross, but net is 6.
You're dead right. Yeah. I know this is not 20 billion. This is not a 30 billion fund. They might have some reinsurance that they can claim on, but I think that the initial statement that they made, that they 3 times covered, forget about it. I just can't see it. And this does not fall into the normal insurance, Santam or any of the other big groups. So who's going to pay for this? I have no idea. This is going to go into multi-billions. And I agree with you. I think the biggest losers are going to be the mall owners, the shopping owners. And just to repeat, from most of the Walmart, Mass Marts and that, unless they own the property. It's not a big deal to go and rebuild a shop or something like that. But where a whole center is being burnt down, Alec, I think this is going to be a very, very costly rebuild.
So,
I don't know where we get the money from.
If I hear you correctly, then you say the international investors are saying it's not such a big deal. We'll ride this out. We already put it into the risk premium for South Africa, whatever. For the locals, though, the impact on top of COVID, on top of the reverse in the economy, and all the other factors that we know that are concerning within South Africa might just tip some more skilled people over the edge. I hear some people saying who know these things that the immigration is going to rocket as a consequence.
This is a Main Street affair. This is not a JSE story, not at all. This is this is really down at the ground level, which is going to upset people. And there's no doubt the skills will go find something else. Already, I'm sure they're starting to phone up the various embassies and make appointments. So it's another event like that. And I think it's those images that we saw last week that will tip people. And it's those people who are living in absolute fear in your part, where is it, the Ladies
Newcastle.
and Newcastle,
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
It's absolutely tragic.
Have you seen anything like this before, Dave, in your life? Have you been around a long time?
Forget about it. 1984 was nothing like this. 1976 was nothing like this. And don't make those comparisons. They were uprisings in selected areas and burning and tire burning, etc., but not in an organized way like this. I haven't seen anything in South Africa like that. So this is not the events that came after Rubicon as well. They were far better controlled. They were confined to kind of townships or various areas.
So what happens next? What happens from here? What's the upside?
Government.
Give us your high road.
The upside, the high road is that you can't put the same people who've taken us here and put them in charge to take us out of here. That's my biggest frustration, is that we've got to make changes, and you've got to recognize it, that changes have to be made. And these are not changes to invite Magashule and Zuma back into government. These are complete opposite. You've got to get a government that is business orientated. And Alec, I've said this on your show, and I think from the first time we started speaking many years ago, we as a country, you've got to lay out the red carpet. And I'm quoting to an extent also Neil Froneman as well. But you can't invite people to come in and invest here with a rule book. Throw that rule book away. In other words, invite them in and say, what can we do for you to make a success of a business in South Africa? We've got all this labor. We've got all these young people. What can we do? What do we do normally because of political ideology and all the other issues? We tell them exactly how they're going to transact business, and that takes them away. You can't tell them the rules. You've got to let them just carry on. Forget about, until we've got growth to the levels that we wanted, forget about political ideology. Just make sure that that we're able to reestablish ourselves as an industrial force, or even a mining force, whatever force, an economic force. But we can't do it with rules.
If you want a South Africa that flourishes, where people can get jobs, where unemployment does not decline, you need to get rid of the ideologues and bring in the pragmatists, would you say?
Absolutely. I always make a joke. I say, you've got to put your pinstripe suit on with your laptop and march on Pretoria. It's that kind of a coup. It's not a military coup, it's a business coup. And you've got to get pragmatic people at the top there to make this into an attractive investment destination. And Bernard said it in the previous segment, there is opportunity in this country. There are a lot of people who want to see the success of this place. And there's plenty. We've got everything that you need. You've got everything you need to make a successful business, but you just need to get the right people in charge.